I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Ehrlich.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable.
This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
And you're like,
it
oh god,
is
oh god,
a very
god.
like, oh boy, uh-oh, oh my, this feels way too close to home. He feels very comfortable in this role.
It's like, wow, he's acting. It's almost like he's not acting.
It's almost like he's not acting at all. And it really was, oh boy, a different situation.
One. But yeah, this whole Kendrick and Drake thing is just getting out of hand. It's just getting silly. But I love getting into it because it's just fun to see these people feud it out.
Hey, you know, it sounds like a lot of fun. The only time that I get into these types of things is occasionally when Kanye does or says something ridiculously stupid, or like now he's showing up to these different events with like the face masks on and the crucifixes over his eyeballs and stuff. I'm like, what are you doing, guy?
But
like
he jumped in on it too, on Kendrick's side, and I just imagine like the two of them are like arguing over the dinner table, and like Kanye's got his face down, and then like he hears the conversation, and he goes just, and then someone's like, okay, just eat this regular peanut butter sandwich that definitely doesn't have sedatives in it, and then he eats it, and then he just goes back to bed.
So I feel bad because I genuinely believe that Kanye
had something.
He had or has some type of something or other. I don't know what
100%
it is or whatever, but it seems like sort of sociopathic, narcissistic kinds of stuff, but it's like infected him to the bone, and it's stopped being super funny, and it's just become like, buddy, what are you doing? College Dropout was a great album. What are you doing? Like, yeah. That's not even fair.
It's like what Pete Davidson said. He's
albums.
Like, hey, from one crazy guy to another, just take the meds. You know,
right? Like, come on, we all need some help sometimes. I take Adderall. I need it, man. Otherwise, I'd be off the walls. Which seems counter to what most people think, but it actually calms me. It makes me like not have the shakes and stuff like that.
I have had crazy ADHD ever since I was a kid, and I would take Adderall for the most part. Now I'm become so sensitive to it because I've been off of it for about 8 years that I take like a child's dose, and I will be up for 16 hours making the best knives I've ever made and not talking to anybody. And I have no emotional affect. Like, Shalana will try to tell me a joke, and I'll be like, I don't get it. And then I'll go back into the shop and like not talk to anybody.
I found that for me, it's usually I'll take 1 5 milligram pill in the mornings, and I'm pretty much done, because it'll be by like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it'll start to wear off. And then it's like the rest of the day is kind of coming down and chilling out and not feeling the effects as much and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But hey, everyone, welcome to the Biographers. Always a great segue that we have here. I'm Daniel Newman, and with me is Akiva Miola.
Hi there.
And today we're going to be getting back into the life of Jack Daniel. This is going to be part number 4. Hopefully y'all have been able to tune into the past 3 episodes and have enjoyed those so far.
Yep, let's get into it.
What have you been? What are your thoughts so far, buddy? You liking the content? You liking what we're talking about?
Yeah, man, it's been really fun to see Jack Daniel sort of develop as a character. He's just sort of this, almost like a SpongeBob-y type character, where he's just like this overly positive, very nice person, and like generally bad things seem to somehow avoid him despite like catastrophe happening all the time. He's in this crazy socioeconomic situation, taxes going everywhere, but he's still managing to only get better, get more land, more property. And most of the time it's just through being a genuinely nice guy. You know, he's got family, friends running the distillery with him. You know, he's got his previous mentor now working for him now. Most of the land that he's
quit, though, remember? He's just about to be at the end of that. He's like basically leaving Jack to be on his own.
Well, I was talking about Uncle
Nearest.
Yeah.
Uncle Nearest, yeah. So I will be honest with you, we're not really going to be talking about Uncle Nearest much more at all. And from what I'm able to sort of gather, it seems like Uncle Nearest, he worked for Jack and Dan for quite a while, and then eventually just retired. And that was that. It was, I don't think there was much ceremony to it. I think it was like, oh, well, thanks, Uncle Nearest, you're the best. And then I would imagine, I couldn't find when he actually passed away, or actually, to be more accurate, I didn't look up when he passed away. I actually kind of want to do that now. So here, I'll put that out there for just the recording here. And for all y'all is that I'll try to add that into the next episode just as a quick little, factoid of what happened with Uncle Nearest, because I actually surprisingly didn't look that up.
Also, for any of you who are still interested in the real McCoy debate, it seems like the rest of the internet is also debating it. But Daniel, I think you are correct. The leading idea is the Scotch whiskey smuggled into the U.S. by Captain Willie McCoy during the era of Prohibition.
Oh,
but then there's also the other idea of a different McCoy also involved with alcohol. So maybe well, no, there it is. The other real McCoy is also talking about the oiling system. I don't really understand. So any of you folks who want to get more picky about that and do a little bit more research, because we definitely have enough research on our plates, feel free to send us an email.
Yeah, if anybody has some definitive information, I'd be curious to know as well. I was always under the impression that it had something to do with liquor, and I could have sworn that when I looked at his IMDb page, Chris Pratt is making a movie called The Real McCoy. Huh. And I honestly can't even remember what was there. Anyway, we can move on from it. But yeah. I would be very curious to know as well on what the Real McCoy kind of whole story would be. Mm-hmm. Well, with that being said, let's kick it off here. Let's get back into Jack Daniel. So last time, we saw the young distiller Jack Daniel finally end his moonshining ways to start his own distillery, in partnership with his longtime mentor, Dan Call. But all was not well in the world of bourbon, as federal taxes and regulations were making it increasingly difficult for local producers to stay in business. Where we ended last time, Jack and his fellow distillers around Lynchburg, Tennessee, had written a formal letter to the commissioner of the IRS listing their grievances in an attempt to get laws and regulations amended. But after increasing pressures from the growing temperance movement, Jack's longtime mentor, Dan Call, decided to fully relinquish himself from the whiskey business, which left Jack to fend for himself. Now, around this time, in 1880, another important character to the world of Jack Daniel emerged, Jack's nephew, Lemuel Motlow. Now, Lem, or Lemmy, as Jack called him, was the son of Jack's sister, Nettie, and started working for Jack at age 10. Lem was a strong and stocky kid, contrasted by a high-pitched voice which spurred on quite a bit of bullying in his youth. However, Lem never had a problem with bullies and was known to readily swap fisticuffs with any miscreant that should dare to make fun. Now, Jack liked him immediately, and within a few years was being taken under the wing of Jack's newest master distiller, Bill Hughes. Now, Lem became such an invaluable, passionate, and dedicated worker that Jack soon had him in mind to take over the entire company when the time came. Remember that by this point in our story, Jack is just about 30 years old, and while he is still fairly young, life expectancy was no guarantee, so Jack was very aware that a successor needed to be lined up in case anything should happen to him. And this wasn't just a case of nepotism. Lem really seemed to prove himself to Jack over the years. In one story, a friend of Jack's came to visit the farm one day to find an 11-year-old Lem up to his knees in pig feces, flomping his feet out of the mud as he walked around the pen to feed the hogs. Jack's friend said, quote, "What the hell do you mean letting your sister's boy do this?" To which Jack replied, "Oh, I'm just trying him out. If he sticks, I'm giving him the place."
Wow.
Pretty cool. So he wasn't just like...
I bet you he saw a little bit of himself in Lemmy, too.
Probably being a little guy and getting beat up and stuff like that. Yeah. Although it doesn't seem like Jack got beat up a whole lot, but I'd imagine he took a butt kicking or two in his life.
Yeah, and also just being being a really spirited little kid who's sort of taking on the big boy jobs, that type of thing.
Yes. Now, I will forewarn, don't be celebrating Lem too much. We're going to get into some other stuff down the road. He did not share a lot of Jack's niceness.
Ethical
Lem was
stances.
a lot more, I'm just going to say it right now, racist. He was also a lot more angry and a lot more demanding. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves there, and we'll talk about that as time goes on. So again, he's not necessarily a hero or anything like that. Lem's
But not a villain yet.
Not a villain yet. Right now, he's an 11-year-old little kid. But being the good uncle that Jack was, he didn't let Lem into the distillery for another 7 years, not until he was 18. Over the years of mentorship, the two remained close, but were noted to be constantly arguing, a strategy Jack employed to ensure that his protege knew how to argue for him when he was no longer around.
Okay.
So he was like teaching him how to fight, basically.
Yeah.
Now, it's important to remember that Jack always had a partner in crime when it came to distilling and selling his liquor. So Dan Call leaving the business wasn't exactly great news initially. Though it meant there was a greater opportunity to make a personal fortune, the marketplace for whiskey had drastically changed since Jack first started. Hell, the marketplace for shopping in general was starting to take shape in a way we would actually recognize today. Believe it or not, it was around this time in history that the concept of branding and marketing was just starting to emerge. Just to name a few companies that were founded around this time, Campbell's Soup hit the shelves in 1869, Levi Strauss Overalls in 1873, and Quaker Oats in 1878.
Well, you know what? A lot of that actually makes sense because a lot of those inventions were from wartime. I'm pretty sure canned goods was sort of a major aspect of Civil War rations.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and Levi Strauss is not on the naughty list for folks that we might end up doing biographies about because actually has a pretty interesting life himself.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, now my ears are perked. Now I want to know more about Levi Strauss.
Yeah, Jewish immigrant who was known as the Egg Eaters, which was this sort of weird phrase that you would find for Orthodox Jews who would cross the American West, and because there were not that many kosher places to buy meat, eggs were a good source of protein for these folks. So he ended up selling lots of denim for tents and stuff for gold miners, and then eventually started making pants. You can actually find Levi pants in like old gold mines all across the
I think
American West.
I did know that actually, but I didn't know that at all about Levi Strauss.
Yeah,
That's super interesting.
As an archaeologist, I probably wouldn't want to be grabbing the pants that were left in the coal mine because I imagine that there was some accident with whatever lunch they had, which is why they left them behind.
There's probably good reason that the pants are still there.
There's a YouTube channel that I'll plug called, I want to say Cerro Gordo or Cerro Gordo, which is essentially this mining town that got bought up by some guy during the pandemic, and he's been rebuilding it, and he goes diving in these mines and in this old antique hotel, and he actually finds a pair of Levi Strauss jeans in one of the mines. Once again, not exactly one that I have to pick up, but I guess after 200 years, it's considered history.
We won't go into it a whole lot, but did I ever tell you the story of when I went to the Mojave Desert with my friends?
No.
Very long story short, everyone. We ended up going down to the bottom of a probably 500 foot down, if not more, mine.
Ooh.
Scared the pants off me. And we're talking about like wooden planks that were bolted to the rock, and we had to like make our way down 100-foot shimmy things.
I'm okay with that.
I'm already claustrophobic. When we got to the very, very bottom of the mine, there was a owl that didn't decompose, because there was nothing down there to make it decompose.
It's just a mummified owl.
It was literally it was in a perfectly intact barn owl that was just at the bottom of this mine. It couldn't find its way out. It died down there. Anyway, we can move on. But that was a crazy psycho experience.
Yeah. So Levi Strauss, not off the list.
Not off the list. We can add him for sure. So now that Dan Call was officially out of the picture, the first order of business for Jack was to change the name of his company, as he could no longer call it Daniel and Call Distillery. Now, given that Jack was now the sole owner, it only seemed appropriate to name it after himself, so he changed the name of his company to Jack Daniel's Distillery. But the actual name of his whiskey also needed to be changed. At first, he simply called it Jack Daniel Whiskey. But once he started to get into the game of marketing and advertising, he started labeling the product Jack Daniel's Old Time Distillery. But this still didn't produce the effect he was after. Then, one day, Jack had a stroke of genius, the likes of which are still echoing today. he decided to call his product Jack Daniel's Old Number 7. Now, why is this a stroke of genius? Let me ask you, what does Old Number 7 mean? If you were new to the world of alcohol and saw a bunch of names like Old Crow and Smith's and Eaton and Tolly, and then you saw one that said Jack Daniel's Old Number 7, would you be more inclined to pick it up?
I would say so. In fact, it's always been something that I've thought about, number 7. I was like, because when you were talking about the districts, I thought that would be what it is, that he moved to district number 7, but I still don't really know why. I think maybe it's because it has a bit of mystery to it.
But that's what I mean. It's an intriguing thing, right? You see it and you're like, ooh, okay, that's different. And I definitely know that I would be more inclined to pick it up if I was seeing those other names on the shelf. I'd be asking myself, Old Number 7? What's Old Number 7? Was that like the 7th iteration of whiskey they came up with, and to them it's the best one yet? Is this some ancient recipe passed down from generation to generation? I gotta try this.
Yeah, 100%.
See what I'm saying?
That's kind of the same idea that I had with my knives, actually. That's where I got a bit of inspiration from Jack Daniel, which is so weird. I didn't even put the conclusion there, but for the last 2 years since I've been a professional knife maker, my Western-style chef knife, my first real design that I made patterns for and replicated, was called my pattern number 1. And the reason why was because I was like, well, Jack Daniel's got number 7, so I should start naming my patterns pattern number 1, pattern number 2. So if you ever buy one of my Western chef knives, a lot of the times you'll see it on there as
right on.
Pattern number 1.
You never told me this. I didn't know that. That's super cool.
Inspired
How
by Jack.
serendipitous.
I know. It literally didn't even occur to me until just now, even though
That's
we've already
crazy.
4 episodes in. Yeah, pattern number 1 was because of Jack Daniels.
That's super cool. Now, maybe you don't agree with us, but everyone else at the time sure did. Before long, Jack would become one of the most popular brands in the area, and as we all know, one of the most popular brands in the world. So what does Old Number 7 actually mean? Well, there are a few different stories. One story comes from one of Jack's master distillers, Bill Hughes, who claimed Jack came up with the name as a tribute to a business owner in Tullahoma who owned 7 stores and bought Jack's whiskey in bulk. But this story was recalled by the distiller's daughter after his death, and there is no evidence to support this claim. Another story comes from Jack's own nephew, Lem Motlow, who claimed they had misplaced a batch of whiskey which ended up sitting for 7 years, but when they ended up selling it, the sales of the product was so popular that they decided to keep the name Old Number 7.
But they don't age it for 7 years on a regular basis, so that doesn't...
Well, that was the thing, is that he was like, we left it, we forgot about it, and it went for 7 years instead of the normal 4 that they were doing at the time or whatever it was. I think it was 4 or 5 years. So, but it sold so well, so that's what he had supposedly claimed.
Interesting.
Now, the official story that the Jack Daniel's distillery will tell you today is simple. We don't know. Even it's a bit of a mystery to them.
Interesting.
However, the most plausible reason for the name is quite possibly the most straightforward. See, when Jack and Dan had first registered their distillery with the IRS in the early 1870s, they were in District Number 4 of Tennessee, as we talked about in the last episode. But remember, the IRS later remapped the districts of Tennessee and combined District 4 into District 5. Within each district, in order to keep track of everything and label everything correctly, the IRS assigned each distillery a specific number. When they were rezoned into District 5, their number was changed to 16. But when they were in District 4, you guessed it, they were distillery number 7.
I knew it had something to do with that, because everything it seems about whiskey has to be location. It's like at this point you just advertise it by sending them your address. It's so
true.
Yeah.
In many, many ways, you're very, very right. So Jack's new number was 16, but his old number was 7. Hence, Old Number 7.
That definitely sounds like the most plausible one.
Right. Do we know this to be definitively true? No, we do not. But if you consider all the factors, it does seem to hold the most water. Jack loved the tradition he was a part of and wanted to remind old drinkers where his brand came from. Old Number 7 represented the tradition he was continuing to honor, the tradition taught to him by Uncle Nearest. So it does make a lot of sense. Now, despite his stroke of genius in marketing, Prohibition was still looming on the horizon, with more supporters joining the cause every day. To help combat this, Jack, along with his fellow Tennessee distillers and various other whiskey enthusiasts, formed a group called the State Protective Association. The group's goal was to, quote, safeguard and uphold the manufacturing and sale of whiskeys, brandies, wine, ale, and beer as at present regulated by law against aggressions of the Prohibition movement in the state. So in other words, if they're going to organize against us, we're going to organize against them.
They need a little catchphrase like the other ones did. You know,
if only they had Rage Against the Machine. We're going to take the power back.
So corny.
Yes, it is. Now, they weren't exactly going about everything legally, as they were known to bribe state officials, newspapers, lobbyists, and were even known to commit fraud in state elections.
Well, hey, everybody seemed to have been doing that anyway. I feel like temperance movement folks already had their people inside. I
tend to agree.
Yeah.
It's basically got fight fire with fire, is what it felt like.
It was less of an election and more of a bidding war, it seems.
Now, chief on their hit list was Tennessee State Senator J.H. McDowell, who had recently introduced a bill to the state Senate that proposed simply, no person shall sell or keep for sale as a beverage any intoxicating liquors whatsoever.
Wow.
That's a quote.
Yeah, that would be earth-shattering.
Earth-shattering, right? If passed, it would be a death sentence for all legitimate Tennessee distillers. But thankfully, the bill was rejected by Tennesseans when it went to vote. But this was the fight Jack was up against over the next 10 years, and it was a tough battle. Over the years, numbers began to fall. By 1886, the number of distillers registered in District 5 fell from 23 to 15. By the end of 1887, that number would fall to just 3.
Wow.
Yes.
That's what, a sixth of the distillers?
A quarter,
left?
if not, yeah, something like that. Well, from 23 down to 3, I don't even know what the math would be on that.
Yeah.
That's like super cut. Now, those 3 remaining were John Eaton Distillery, Tolley Brothers, and Jack Daniel.
Last man standing.
Last of them. Around 1884, Jack had a choice to make. Keep going like normal and hope things panned out, or double down on his efforts, expand like crazy, and become a dominant force in the world of whiskey. Obviously, he chose the latter.
Mm-hmm.
But how did he do it? Well, the first thing he did was add a second location. Always enthralled by the magic of distillation, Jack wanted to set up shop in a place of legend and had his eyes fixed on the famous Cave Springs Hollow in his hometown of Lynchburg, which sat right next to Mulberry Creek, kind of a legendary creek as well for whiskey. Now, Cave Springs Hollow is home to one of the greatest legends of whiskey, as it is said to be the original site on which Alfred Eaton first learned of and created the Lincoln County process of filtering whiskey through charcoal. Wow. So this Cave Spring Hollow's place. The only problem was that the land was still owned by another distilling operation, Hines and Berry, though they weren't using the place much these days. Both of the operators were now getting older and were more or less retired. So after some badgering, they finally agreed to put their 142-acre piece of land up for sale in the form of a public auction. Surprise, surprise. Jack won the bid, purchasing the entire thing for just $2,180.40, which is just about $68,000 in today's money.
So he bought 140 acres. Just doing the math here, he bought 140 acres for less than half of his yearly income.
And that included a full distilling operation. A full distillery, a full working, mass-producing distillery.
Yeah.
And that was for $68,000.
Yeah, yeah. The idea of even buying like...
The still that could do that today would be $68,000, if not more.
Half of anybody's salary, at least, if not several years' worth of money.
Unbelievable, though. Now, almost immediately upon purchasing the land, Jack built a new brick still house and a small shack that he called his office. With this new purchase, Jack had now increased his whiskey production by 50%. Now, he probably could have increased his production by as much as 200%, but Jack always cut off his daily production at just 300 gallons, as he insisted that quality was more important than quantity. Something I agree with as well.
Agreed.
Now, things were going well, and Jack had a strong reputation as both a community leader and all-around nice guy. And as a cool little side note bonus, it's worth noting that Jack was now employing the 2 sons of his old mentor, Uncle Nearest, both of whom said they shared the same respect for Jack that they had for Dan Call. The 2 boys, George and Eli Green, were known to be so strong that together they could lift Lem Motlow's 1,200-pound horse.
Whoa.
So one of the guys would get underneath the horsey bits, right? And then the other would get behind the front legs of the horse, and they would literally do like a squat, and they would lift this 1,200-pound horse off the ground together.
Squatting 600 pounds,
Each.
that is just some corn-fed country strength right there.
Those guys are monsters, man. It's crazy. Over the years, 7 generations of the Green family have been employed by Jack Daniel's Distillery.
Wow.
Amazing,
that is so
right?
cool. What a legacy. That
really,
is
really
super,
amazing.
super cool.
And it's amazing to think that those folks were over the generations working there, all the while knowing y'all wouldn't be doing any of this if it wasn't for our great-great-great-great-great
It's
grandpa.
true. Yeah, I
you
mean,
know what I mean?
Yeah, the Green
Like,
family has just as much of a stake in Jack Daniels as anybody should. I mean,
Absolutely.
Jack Daniels wouldn't be Jack Daniels if it wasn't for,
Uncle Nearest,
Uncle
man.
Nearest.
Totally. Now, with all this good fortune, Jack was becoming more and more drawn to the finer things in life and was noted to have a weakness for fine horses and fine clothes. Part of his now daily outfit included a diamond ring on his finger, along with a matching diamond tie pin, just for good measure.
I'm getting Doug Dimmadome vibes at this point.
Who's Doug Dimmadome?
Fairly Odd Parents. You don't remember Doug Dimmadome from the Dimmesdale Dimmadome?
So I didn't have Nickelodeon growing up, so I had very limited exposure to things like Fairly Odd Parents. I always enjoyed it when I caught it, but not enough for it to be like, storied.
Well,
for me.
also, I feel like if you had the access to it, you would definitely be dressing like Jack Daniels on a regular basis.
I already kind of do with the hats and stuff
it's
like that.
true. The hats and the fur
it's not
coats.
far off. Now, locals recalled Jack's daily horse trots into town for lunch, dining at his favorite restaurant, the Salmon House, where he was known to eat fried catfish and fried okra as a special favorite. And by the way, the Salmon House was owned and operated by a woman known as Miss Mary Bobo, which is already a fun name. And if you ever find yourself in Lynchburg, Tennessee, you can still eat at the Salmon House to this day, although it is now renamed Miss Mary Bobo's.
Yo, we have to go, and we're going to dress up like a couple of like old Western gentlemen, pinky rings, all that.
I have already been thinking about, I don't think we'll be able to make it happen just because timing wise or whatever, but I've already thought about like, man, could we drive to Lynchburg to record the last episode? I know.
That would be so cool.
It'd be like a 2-day drive to get there, but we're going to find out. We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. But at Jack Daniel's grave, there are 2 giant cast iron chairs literally in front of his grave, facing each other. And we'll talk about that more later, but I keep thinking about this like, dude, we could record the last episode seeing those chairs.
That would be so cool.
Just saying. Anyways, we can move on, but that's something we can think about. Now, you might be saying to yourself, man, this guy is killing it. He looks good. He's got money. He's funny. Everyone loves him. How's he doing with the ladies? Well, apparently, Jack did pretty well, despite only being 5'2". His relationships usually didn't last long and didn't have much romance, but they all seemed to love his quick wit and even quicker feet. Apparently, he was an awesome dancer.
Oh, okay. I was like, what is it, like a running competition?
No, he was a really, really good dancer. He had quick feet. But as for now, he would remain a bachelor as his true love was still in whiskey. Jack was truly a local celebrity. Some even called him a local king. But again, this was local, as he was not truly known yet on a national level. Now, if he wasn't beloved enough by his community already, Jack was about to do even more to earn the title of best dude in Lynchburg. Now, up to this point, the little town of Lynchburg was so antiquated that it didn't even have its own bank. Earlier, we talked about Jack and everybody keeping money under their mattresses and in safes and stuff. This is why. Lynchburg did not have a bank, right? So till now, community members of the area kept their money in personal safes, under mattresses, or if they were really desperate, they could pay a local guy to take their money to an adjacent town that actually had a bank. But that was costly. In 1887, Jack got to talking with a man from the First National Bank named L.D. Dickerson, and plans soon began to formalize for the construction of Lynchburg's first bank. The deal was, so long as the locals could come up with 50% of the cost, which was $50,000, the bank would be built. Jack personally contributed $10,000, which is 20% of the total cost.
Wow. Yeah. What happened to rich people actually like contributing to like you know what? Fine.
Giving back?
Exactly. You know what? If you want to brag and use all your money to show off, do that stuff, you know? Less rockets and more like, you know, put your face on a bank. You know what? At least we'll have a bank, you know?
Completely agree with you. And he's the poster child for this, and I love it. Now, once plans were approved, they now needed a massive safe to securely store everyone's money. Only problem was, the safe was in Tullahoma, 20 miles away, and the road was absolutely smashed after the previous rainy season. Oh, and the safe also weighed 6,000 pounds.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll have to bring the greenest boys. Wait.
The greens, yeah.
I think we'll have to bring the green boys to go ahead and carry that for them.
Yeah, right? Now, once again, Jack the hero stepped up to the plate. He sent his best wagon driver and team of mules to bring the safe home, but sadly, this wasn't enough. The safe was too heavy and the roads were too rough. But again, Jack was a pillar of the community, and several other local mule and cart owners happily agreed to aid Jack and his team in getting the safe to Lynchburg. Even with the extra help, it was still slow goings and took 2 months to move the safe into the new bank. But they, with a massive helping hand from Jack, had done it. They had officially brought a bank to Lynchburg.
It took them 2 months to move it, 20 miles?
20 miles. 6,000 pound safe. Because you have to remember, this was before any automobile would ever be mass produced. That wouldn't be, the Model T was 1908.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this was literally, how many donkeys can we get over here to pull this 6,000 pound safe on an unpaved, dirty, muddy, unpredictable road?
Never mind the fact that none of these wagons are probably even built to carry a load that heavy.
I honestly
I
can't
imagine they had to build something to move it.
Yes. It's insane.
You know.
So, yeah, I don't know how they did it, but
That's
they did
wild.
it. Now, as a thank you, Jack would be voted in as vice president of the bank, a position he would hold for over 20 years. Imagine the pride. Little Jack from Lynchburg, who grew up in the destructive wake of the American Civil War, witnessed the desolation of the area, and lost both parents, had managed to claw his way up from the depths of poverty to become one of the wealthiest and most well-respected people in Lynchburg, possibly even the state. And somehow, Jack managed to do this before the age of 40.
Wow.
I have
That's
goosebumps.
seriously incredible.
I don't know why. It's just like this stuff makes me so like, "Gah!" Now, things went on like this in the 1880s for Jack. Business was booming and Jack was enjoying the fruits of his labors. But if you remember from episode 2 of this series, Jack's goal from the beginning was to get to a point where he could put his feet up and enjoy the good life as a titan of the whiskey industry. The 1880s were almost over, which means we're on the eve of what history would eventually call the gay 90s. I know.
Slay.
Now, the gay 90s embodied the spirit of excess and extravagance that America was now enjoying as the Industrial Revolution had created such titans as J.P. Morgan and Andrew Carnegie, among many others. Jack was no exception and would also get wrapped up in the excess of the times. By this point, Jack was independently wealthy enough that he probably could have just stayed in Lynchburg, sold his goods around the state, and enjoyed the life of an extremely eligible bachelor. He had amassed over 300 acres of land all told. He had a steady stream of income from his whiskey business, the produce he grew on his land, and the livestock he raised and sold. Even more, Jack's nephew, Lem Motlow, who was in his early 20s by this point, was running most of the day-to-day operations of the distillery, along with most of the business management. All Jack really needed to do at this point was do a quality assurance sample of all his barrels every day before they were shipped out. But Jack was still determined to get his whiskey distributed around the country. I mentioned a few episodes back that the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869, but that was only the beginning. Since then, hundreds, if not thousands, of additional miles of railroad were laid across the United States, which meant distribution was becoming bigger and more efficient than ever. But what actually pushed him to expand beyond what was already a fairly big success? The answer is in his nephew, Lem. Now, I couldn't find out exactly how it happened, but sadly, in 1891, Jack's sister Nettie passed away.
Aw.
Yeah, and seemingly before her time, as she left behind 6 children who were young enough to need support.
Jeez. Well, they were already living at the Daniels house, right?
Nettie, yeah, I think she might have been at this point.
She was taking care of the house, doing the food prep and all that. That's unfortunate.
Yes, she was. You're right. I'm like, he has so many siblings. I'm like, which one is? Because there's Betty, and then there's Nettie, and then there's. Anyways. Okay. Now, being the good big brother that he was, Lem then decided to buy the family farm, take in all his siblings along with his father, Felix, but not before taking a wife, a woman named Clara Rieger. Lem was now a father to his siblings, whether he liked it or not, and employees around the distillery started to notice a paternal shift in him. He started taking the business even more seriously and began to push hard on the notion that he and Uncle Jack needed to make themselves known in Nashville, the big dog. But that wasn't so easy a proposition for Jack to accept, as he knew that aggressive expansion meant competition with the other big players, in addition to ruffling the feathers of the Temperance fighters. Now, we've talked about some local competitors in the past, but now that Jack was trying to expand massively outside of Tennessee, let's talk for just a moment about who he would be up against in the world of American whiskey. First, there was a fellow up in Kentucky named James Beauregard Beam, known to his friends as Big B, whose great-grandfather, Jacob Beam, started distilling bourbon in the Blue Hills of Kentucky around 1788. The Beam family was already fairly well known for their bourbon, labeled Old Tub back in the day, but when Jim Big B Beam took over the family business in 1894, he ramped up their daily production from 360 gallons a day to 450 gallons per day.
Wow.
I probably don't even need to say it, as I'm sure most of you already know. Jim Beam Bourbon is still one of the biggest competitors of Jack Daniels to this day.
That's old money right there.
Old money. Next up on Jack's competitor list was T.W. Samuels, who founded his own Kentucky distillery in the 1840s called Burke's Distillery, which was at the time producing 645 gallons per day. Burke's Distillery would eventually be purchased in 1953 and have its name changed to something slightly more familiar, Maker's Mark.
Wow, it is so crazy that despite the fact that all of these just mega whiskey businesses were neighbors with each other, that they're still in competition to this day.
And they're still, and they're basically still being made in pretty similar ways. They're at bigger scales, but they're like same area, everything. It's wild. Now, last on the list was George G. Brown, a native to Louisville, Kentucky, who owned and operated the whiskey brand of Old Forester. And as we had mentioned in episode 1, Old Forester is named after Nathan Bedford Forrest, the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. You're welcome, everybody. I can't ever buy Old Forester again. Not that I've ever bought it in the past, but now if I see it, I'm like, no, screw that. No, thank you. I don't want your racist money. Now, coincidentally, in 1870, George G. Brown, along with partner John Foreman, would found another company together that would eventually become known as the Brown-Forman Corporation. In about 65 years from this point in our story, in 1956, the Brown-Forman Corporation would fully acquire Jack Daniel's Distillery, and it is still owned by them to this day.
Wow. So were they privately owned and then they just decided to sell, or was there like a business flop or?
No, I mean, it was basically they just ended up deciding to sell it. Without getting into too many spoilers, Lem Montlau ran Jack Daniel's Distillery through World War II.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah. So it really stayed. I mean, it was up until pretty much that point, it was 2 generations of distillers. It was Jack and his nephew. And
that's so cool.
So very, very, very like kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, like tight
family
knit.
business.
Yeah, family business. It was very much of their family. Now, these were just some of the fierce competitors that Jack would be up against if he were to expand in the way his nephew Lem was pushing for. The other big worry for Jack was in his old nemesis, General Rahm, who was no longer the commissioner of the IRS, but was now the lobbyist for the Whiskey Trust. The Whiskey Trust, originally named the Distillers and Cattle Feeders Trust, which actually had the nickname of the Octopus, which is kind of ominous, was founded in 1887 and consisted of a group of big brand distillers out of Illinois. It was formed because of the intense amount of excess corn that grew in the region, which led to a large quantity of distilleries. Even more, the distilleries out in Illinois used a method of production known as rectified whiskey, which meant they were adding fresh, unaged bourbon to barrel-aged bourbon, which allowed them to really stretch their production volume.
Yeah, I was about to say that's kind of a downtick in quality in comparison to sort of our Lincoln County process whiskey that we've been seeing right now.
But for a lot of these Old West people, and by the way, when I say Old West, so when Ulysses S. Grant was president, which ended in 1877, right? I just was on some Hulu or something the other day, and I saw they had the original Wild Wild West show. Remember they had the Will Smith movie from back in the 90s? It was actually based off of a 60s like kind of serial show, right? It specifically says in the description for that show that the two agents work for Ulysses S. Grant.
Wow.
The show is called Wild Wild West. So remember, this is truly in the heart of what we would consider the time of the American Wild West.
Yep.
So it's just kind of an interesting thing. And so where I'm going with this is that these people that were making this type of liquor, they knew that their clientele wasn't after a sophisticated, sippable, lovely afternoon on the porch whiskey. Nah, dude, they're going to the saloon saying, give me 5 shots because I want to get wasted now. So like they didn't really care that it was super aged. They just wanted to generally have the taste. So these Illinois whiskey makers knew that and more or less capitalized on it.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's really interesting. And also, I still keep going back to the fact that it was in Jack Daniel's lifetime that whiskey was previously clear, not even caramel colored, because they didn't use barrel aging.
Yep.
So, a lot of these maybe northern folks in Illinois probably didn't even care whether or not it was, barrel aged or not. They just, like you said, wanted their liquor.
Yep. And most of it came from that initial coloring of it was that they were like, we're trying to make it seem like it's brandy. So again, most of the time when people saw the color in it, the brown color in the liquor, they were like, oh, cool, it's more sophisticated. And that was really it.
Yeah.
It didn't necessarily need to be this barrel-aged flavor they were after.
Exactly.
That evolved over time.
Yeah, which now, I mean, it's unheard of to even think of a whiskey that isn't barrel-aged. Like, why would you?
99% of the time. I have seen some stuff recently. I think they might even do it at the Jack Daniel Distillery, where if you do tastings there, if they do tastings, I can't remember if they do or not.
I believe they do.
I could have sworn somebody said that they got lemonade and not whiskey. But you might be able to pay for a tasting or something. I can't quite remember. But I do know that there are certain distilleries, bourbon distilleries specifically, who will have you taste fully new, unaged, clear whiskey. And it is still just as much whiskey as any of the other whiskeys.
Interesting.
It's just not aged. Doesn't have that kind of barrel flavor.
Yeah.
If you want to call it that.
Neat.
Now, after a bunch of these distilleries around Illinois, Indiana, and Pennsylvania merged or were purchased over the years, a handful of powerhouse distillery owners in the area entered into a trust so as to control all of the whiskey production in the area and squash any competition that should arise. The tactics they employed were brutal, as they were known to drop their whiskey prices so low that local competitors were priced out, and once they shut down, the Whiskey Trust would jack back up their prices and make a huge profit.
Doesn't that sound familiar?
Uh-huh. Additionally, they bribed distributors not to carry competitors' products or sometimes destroy their yield altogether. If certain independent distilleries refused to join the trust, those distilleries would sometimes arrive to their stillhouse to find no stillhouse at all, but rather a smoldering pile of rubble.
Wow.
Yes, the Whiskey Trust was known to literally blow up the competition.
This guy is like a serious like villain, movie villain.
Yeah, dude. And yeah, General Rom is kind of like in this whole thing.
I imagine like he's like lighting a cigar and like the explosion happens in the distance and like the frock of his coat is blowing in the wind.
Like at the end of Django Unchained where he blows up the house.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm picturing right now. And I mean, it's kind of what's happening.
I know, in a weird way. And actually, perfect little segue because General Rom, when he heard about this, really liked the action and saw an opportunity to make a lot of money for himself as a lobbyist for the Whiskey Trust. So he quit his position with the IRS. With General Rom's help, the Whiskey Trust was able to control most of the whiskey industry across the United States, reduce competition, control pricing, and safeguard profits for the trustees. By the early months of 1890, the Whiskey Trust had established a market dominance that controlled 95% of all whiskey sales in the United States. In short, the Whiskey Trust had created a monopoly over the entire whiskey industry in America.
Yeah. A 95% monopoly, no less. That's, I mean, might as well just have every single bottle be running through the trust at this point.
Now, some of you might be saying, hey now, hang on a minute. The Sherman antitrust laws of 1890 were now in place, so there shouldn't be a monopoly. Well, just like we are seeing even in today's economy, monopolies still exist in America, as someone still needs to take action against any corporation that forms a monopoly, which requires lots of investigation and planning, and probably not having your pockets lined by those corporations.
Yeah. It'd be terrible if there were companies these days that had, a hand in, I don't know, commerce, music, shopping, books, audiobooks.
Seriously. Streaming, video streaming.
I don't know who we're talking about anyway.
No, nobody comes to mind in particular, thankfully. Where was I? Now, the Whiskey Trust would happily operate for another 3 years before the Supreme Court did all their homework and ordered that it be dissolved. But that still didn't stop them, as they quickly formed a new company called the Distilling and Cattle Feeding Company. Now, you might be thinking, wasn't that what they were originally called? No, don't be silly. They were originally called the Distillers and Cattle Feeders Trust, not the Distilling and Cattle Feeding Company. Silly head. And they kept on operating into the 1900s. However, for Jack's current distribution system, the Whiskey Trust wasn't directly affecting him at all. But if he wanted to get his brand out west, they would be a serious obstacle to overcome. Again, one of those instances of like, you lucky bastard. Like somehow in your little bubble of Tennessee, you just like weren't affected by these guys from Illinois.
Yeah,
like,
we were literally just talking about the numbers. 95%. That means that 19 out of 20 distilleries were through this trust or through this company, whatever you want to call it, all these different names that they have for it. And somehow slick Jack Daniel managed to slide right past it and still managed to keep his doors open.
Just wiggled through the cracks, man. Like, I don't know how, but it's amazing. But Jack's more immediate competition was with a distiller operating not far away in the town of Normandy, Tennessee, named Emanuel Schwab. Now, Emanuel Schwab was part of a Jewish immigrant family that settled in the area a generation prior, and in the mid-1880s bought most of the shares of Cascade Distillery, as he was a big fan of the product. Emanuel, who changed his name to Victor to seem more American, sadly, was a pretty brilliant businessman, and after making some money with his partial ownership of Cascade Distillery, decided to expand in the form of saloons.
Wow.
Victor figured, why sell to a distributor when I can sell direct to consumer with my own saloons? Super smart.
Yes, very smart move to get around that.
So in Nashville, that's exactly what he did. The Silver Dollar Saloon and the blush-worthy Climax Saloon were his two establishments, both of which became mainstays for all sorts of gamblers, drinkers, and vacationers. The saloons were also an amazing indicator of the spirit of the times, the gay 90s that I was just mentioning. The Climax Saloon alone boasted gorgeous marble floors and columns, a gambling hall, a big saloon, pool tables, and a fully functional theater in the basement with can-can dancers and a full Orchestra.
Ooh.
Radical, dude.
That is
I
so
want to
much
go
fun.
there right now.
That sounds like so much fun.
And by the way, it might not be the exact same location, but I did do an initial little bit of homework, and the Silver Dollar Saloon, at least something that was called and named the Silver Dollar Saloon, existed in Nashville up until I think only recently. I think COVID might have gotten it shut down because no business during COVID. But when I initially looked just on the map inside of Nashville, there was a Silver Dollar Saloon. So I don't know if it was the exact same one, but to my knowledge, it seems like it. Why wouldn't it be? But
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe
like a good
Prohibition
time.
shut it down and then it reopened just to celebrate it. But anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. Now, just in case you're sitting there thinking you have a dirty mind, you don't. The Climax Saloon wasn't just a clever name, it was very on the nose. Yes, indeedy, the top floor of the Climax Saloon functioned not just as a hotel, but mainly a brothel.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
It's just such an obvious name, though. It just makes me laugh. Now, prostitution was still illegal during this time, so Victor had all of the hotel rooms fitted with false walls to hide behind, just in case the police came a-knocking.
I love how he had spent all of this extra money engineering this place to be not look like a brothel, but then it was like, what should we name it? Oh, yeah, let's name it after an orgasm.
Exactly. That's why I'm like, bro, come on now.
All this effort to make it seem hidden.
Now check this out. Victor was so aggressive in his attempts to take down competition in the area that he even took to calling his whiskey Old Cascade Tennessee Whiskey. Undoubtedly a move that irked Jack.
Yeah.
So what did Jack do in response? He opened up 2 saloons of his own, of course. His 2 new establishments were to be called the Red Dog and the White Rabbit. Pretty metal, if you ask me, and both were under construction by the spring of 1892. Both saloons were to reflect the refined and upright image that Jack had carefully cultivated for his brand over the years. The bartenders were dapper with cleanly waxed mustaches, crisp white shirts, silk ties, and slicked hair. The saloons themselves were classy yet simple and quickly became staples of the Lynchburg community. Additionally, Jack hired a brass band called the Silver Cornet Band to tour around the countryside on a wagon, playing joyful tunes and encouraging all those that listened to loosen up with a nip of Jack Daniel's Old No. 7.
Wow, some old-timey advertisement.
Yeah, just literally playing tunes around the countryside. And I love this quote from his master distiller at the time, Jimmy Bedford, who said, quote, "Mr. Jack had a philosophy that good music and good whiskey make a great combination."
Yeah, well, that would end up being the case for him, so.
And all I've got to say to that is, amen, brother. Now, the Silver Cornet Band ended up being an even bigger hit than Jack had anticipated, bringing in hundreds of folks from around the area every Saturday to listen to the band, which in turn created something of an impromptu street fair with all the local vendors coming out as well. In effect, Jack had created a community building event without even knowing it. Now, Lynchburg did also suffer from a pretty nasty fire around this time, which took out a good number of buildings in the town. But once again, Jack had a bit of luck on his side, as none of his buildings burned down, and the destruction from the fires made the people of Lynchburg even more thirsty for a drink.
Wow. At this point, he's just batting 1,000. I don't understand.
I know. I don't know how you can get... He's like Han Solo level lucky minus the carbonite.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, this was all well and good, but dang it! The crafty Victor Schwab out in Nashville was still putting his business to shame. What was he doing so right that Jack was doing so wrong? The simple answer is sex appeal. His brand just wasn't sexy. To the new generation of drinkers, Old No. 7 sounded like something their grandpa would drink. And to women, whiskey in general didn't seem like something they were able to drink. It was just this like manly image around it. So women just generally didn't drink it.
Yeah, I think to some extent we still kind of have a little bit of that.
Except for my wife, who can outdrink me on scotch any day, and I'm very proud of that.
Go Cat.
She's also from a Welsh family, and she more or less grew up drinking scotch because her dad's a big scotch head as well, who also got me into scotch. Anyways, she can also drink the campfire scotch that literally tastes like somebody scooped up the ashes and then just like filtered whiskey through it. I'm not that into that. But anyways, this whole notion that women couldn't drink, Jack wanted to change all that. Right around 1895, Jack started selling a new brand of whiskey that he labeled the Belle of Lincoln. The idea here was that this new spirit was all around softer on the palate, softer in its name, and softer in its image. Maybe softer isn't the right word, maybe more refined, I don't know. Either way, young men and women alike started partaking in the new creation of Jack's, and by the end of 1895, he was selling as much Belle of Lincoln as he was Old Number 7, and was even finding that it was becoming popular in places like Texas, Louisiana, and Alabama.
Can you still buy Belle of Lincoln to this day?
I don't know. That's a question I
don't feel like I've ever
this.
seen that at any liquor store before.
I would imagine there might have been a time where Lem went, we're done with that. But I'm curious about that now. So I will, as I'm going through the editing process of this video, I'll look it up and see if we can put it into the next episode.
I'd be very interested in trying that. Personally, I am not much of a whiskey drinker. I think there's a couple whiskeys that I like. I like Tin Cup, and like Stranahan's is pretty okay. But I would love to try this Belle of Lincoln. I feel like that smoother taste would be right up my alley.
Do you see my liquor cabinet right there?
Yes.
So that I have probably 8 scotches right now.
Wow.
One of these days we'll do a little tasting.
Yes.
I will make you a Scotch man.
We should.
I'm not trying to knock on American whiskey or whatever, but I have the biggest thing I was saying to Kat was the other day I had a little glass of one of these, and I also have some Colorado whiskey as well. And I remember I had been drinking just a little nip of scotch here and there as I was going through this series, because it really put me in the mood for having some whiskey.
Yeah.
And I was sipping them, and I was, these are so tasty, they're so tasty. And I went, I'm gonna have some American whiskey right now. So I had some of the Stranahan's that I have. It's this lovely barrel reserve in port bottles. It's really tasty.
Yeah.
And although it's really tasty, when I take a sniff of it, it's like,
that was
like, good Lord, I need to sit down for a second because it just knocked my socks off, right?
Yeah.
Scottish whiskey, bro, I could bury my nose in there and just breathe and breathe and breathe. And it's like a symphony of smells. I could live in it. It is so delicious. And there is no sting of alcohol when you smell it.
Yeah.
So that is one of the biggest things for me, is it's like, I could just pour myself a little bit of that and just smell it and not even drink it. It is that amazing of a smell. So anyways, that's my personal opinion.
Yeah. I'm more of a cocktail guy. I've never even really explored any booze that I could drink neat for the most part.
Ooh, we'll get you into scotch. It's usually served with just a little bit of water in there, because it brings out more of the flavor and gives takes away some of the harshness. That's how my father-in-law taught me anyways, and he says that's how they do it in Scotland. So. So far my experience has been it's the same thing as we're here in Colorado. It's the same thing as people with who smoke weed, and they're like, oh, this one tastes like strawberries. And I'm like, this one tastes like skunk, just like the last one. Yeah, this smells like skunk. I know what you're talking about. Now, back to it. Now, all of this was well and good, but again, Jack lacked any real presence in the almighty Nashville, something his nephew Lem was continuing to push for. But Jack was too smart for that. He knew that simply setting up a shop in Nashville would only create a war of branding with the other saloon owners. Instead, Jack thought, he should go even further north. Jack was about to plunge a dagger into the heart of Kentucky. In 1892, Jack established a large barrel house in Hopkinsville, Kentucky for the purposes of distribution, as Hopkinsville already had a sizable train depot. When the warehouse was completed, Jack ran a simple ad in the Lynchburg newspaper that said, quote, "Whiskey for sale at reasonable prices. For further particulars, write us."
Okay.
That's
nice.
it.
Subtle.
Clean and
We've
simple.
got it if you want it.
And not to be outdone, Victor Schwab also set up a distribution center in Hopkinsville. He's right on his coattails.
Yep.
Now, when it came to Nashville, though, Jack was more subtle. Rather than be too overt in his plans, Jack contacted an already established whiskey distributor to handle his whiskey for him. In order to persuade the locals of Nashville to convert to the ways of his libations, Jack went back to his roots. Good old-fashioned word of mouth. This was right around the time where refrigeration was becoming a thing, so more than 158 saloons were now operating in Nashville. But Jack figured, why spend all this money on big advertisements when I can just do it all by myself by talking to people? And he didn't even need to hit up all 158 saloons, as all the respectable saloons that attracted the likes of lawyers, business owners, and politicians all congregated along the roughly 100-yard stretch of road in Nashville known as the Men's Quarter.
Interesting.
On the nose. Now, Jack found very little trouble in charming the local aristocratic scene and soon became a boisterous favorite to regular saloon goers. You might think this created too much unwanted competition, but the people of Nashville were all for any kind of alternate drink to water. See, at the time, around 1895, Nashville was home to some 80,000 residents. Any guesses on how many bathrooms, i.e. toilets, Nashville had at the time?
Probably not 80,000.
682.
Oh my God.
That's one toilet for every 117 people. As you can imagine, this led to intense pollution of the Cumberland River, which runs through the center of Nashville, which in turn led to widespread sickness like typhoid, and the death rate steadily increased throughout the 1890s.
Jeez.
Bad news for people's health, but good news for whiskey makers. Before long, Jack had made a name for himself in Nashville and was quickly becoming a favorite saloon patron to both his fellow drinkers and the saloon owners. Even better, Nashville was starting to drink more and more of both his Old No. 7 and his Belle of Lincoln. Things were going very well, but Jack still hadn't met his full potential and would soon make headlines all over the world. He would keep his plans secret to most everyone that knew him, but upon hearing about an international whiskey competition that was taking place, Jack was soon headed for a little event known as the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition, aka the 1904 World's Fair. And that's where we'll pick back up for part 5 of Jack Daniel.
He's
just
growing.
Getting to the World's Fair, baby.
That one was a pretty solid one. I'm really excited. He's now in new areas. His whiskey's coming out of state. He's coming up with new products. He's become this advertiser and sort of really grown into his own now that he's been able to sort of hand the leash of the day-to-day work to all the other friends and family that he's managed to pick up along the way.
And I'm also excited to get into this next episode because we are just, as a little teaser as well to the World's Fair, we're just starting to get into the age of glass bottles and glass bottles being made at scale, which anybody that's ever had a whiskey or scotch ever probably is sitting there going, well, how else would you drink it? Up until basically right now in our story, almost nobody was drinking it out of a glass bottle. It was very, very rare because it was literally every glass bottle more or less had to be made by hand. So there was no, manufacturing process for these glass bottles. So we'll get into that in the next episode.
Yeah. And if you're someone like me, I hate to admit how much the look of the bottle ends up affecting my purchase decision. So
I'm the exact same way. So I'm right there with you. Although scotches most of the time now, they come in like little cylinders, so it's all enclosed.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that too, though. That still looks cool.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode. A couple things to wrap it up. Again, everybody who's interested in any type of chef's knives or custom knife making or anything like that, go and check out Akiva's website, metalworkbymiola.com. And like we always kind of plug, if you're also interested in something custom, you'll have to reach out and ask nicely and everything like that. But he just might be able to whip you up something that you wanted one off or whatever and know that it's made by his hand. You can use the code biographers at checkout. You're going to get 10% off of your order there. Anything you want to say about your website or anything?
Yeah, if you guys are interested in the knives, but aren't necessarily ready to, throw some cash my way and order one, might I recommend the newsletter? Instagram has been a little bit funky with my chef knives. Some of the moderators just tend to
shadow ban,
despite the fact that it's all kitchen knives for the most part. So I'd highly recommend the newsletter. I also do a little bit of writing. Every newsletter comes with a life story or an excerpt. So, you can get to know a little bit more about me and also take a look at whatever I've got that's new. I only send it once every couple of months because a lot of the time I'm sending my knives to some other place. So whenever I have inventory, it's fairly rare. And then I get to, you get to hear a little bit of story.
There we go. I like it. So anybody that's interested, go check out metalworkbymiola.com, MEOLA. You always are better at giving little social media shout outs.
Yeah. So if you guys are interested, make sure that you are following us on Instagram and TikTok and now YouTube at The Biographers.
TikTok is at the.biographers, but it should be easy enough.
Yeah, and we'll add it in the show notes if we need to. Daniel's been working hard at getting the YouTube set up, and hopefully we'll have some clips for our YouTube channel here soon.
And TikTok too, I guess.
Yeah. We haven't had a setup to record our faces because that adds a whole other layer of editing. But maybe in the future we'll have a couple of recorded clips of us just sitting here in this dining room coming up with some awesome biographies.
I really want to get to the point where on TikTok we're able to do a live stream of our recording, because then it's going to be how the sausage is made. So you're going to see where we make mistakes, and you're going to hear me going, "Oh, let me do that again," which I try to cut out from the show so you don't see when I embarrass myself.
All the burping and sneezing
and coughing or whatever. But yeah, I think eventually I would like to do a live stream of us doing this, because it seems like that's where things are heading these days and what people are getting really interested in. And I'd love to engage with people a bit more. But obviously, if we were doing a live stream, we would need somebody to be able to moderate questions and whatnot, because we would not be able to. We just doing our own thing. But I think that's probably going to do it for us today. Again, I hope y'all are enjoying this series on Jack Daniel. We have 2 more to go. This is, again, going to be a 6-part series. I hope, again, you've been enjoying it so far. Anything else, Akiva, from you?
I'm solid. I'm good.
Good to go. All right. Well, we'll let everybody go here. Again, remember, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge. And I do hope you all learned something today. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.